Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining this session from all parts of the world today. I am delighted to welcome you to our webinar on team effectiveness. My name is Burak Koyuncu. I'm a Senior Vice President at LHH and responsible for our leadership development business for the UK and international markets. For those of you who don't know about LHH as much in different areas, quickly to introduce us, we are part of the Adecco Group, and we are a talent solutions provider providing services in career transition and mobility, leadership development, and professional recruitment areas. And we are delighted to be here with you today to talk about a topic that is very important to us, which is team effectiveness. Some of you would know we have been coaching teams, team leaders, and team members for over 50 years. On their effectiveness, and we have been especially realizing in the past few years since the pandemic that team effectiveness has become a critical issue for organizations' performance and success overall. So we are looking to share some of the insights we have learned in the past years with you today. And I'm joined by three amazing guests today. First, we have Gillian Pillens, Research Director at Corporate Research Forum, CRF, and Gillian is also the author of the wonderful report on team effectiveness that came out from CRF recently. We'll talk more about that report soon. Welcome, Gillian.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Thanks. And I am also joined by two LHH colleagues, Claire Jordan and Stephanie Sloan. Stephanie joining us from North America and Claire joining us from the UK. Claire and Stephanie are senior leadership experts with decades of experience in helping teams and organizations in improving their effectiveness. So we are really looking forward to hearing their insights as well. Welcome, Claire and Stephanie.
Thank you.
Yes, thank
you. Before we start, I want to quickly share the agenda, and then I will invite our guests to start sharing the amazing insights they have to share with us today. So what we wanted to do in this session is to have a good balance of research and practical insights. We will first start with some of the research, the recent research that I mentioned that CRF conducted on team effectiveness, which will be shared by Gillian, some highlights around what makes teams effective. I will also briefly talk about our LHH research on the same topic, and then we will move on to some practical insights for organizations, for team leaders and team members. And at the end of the session, we will have some reflection also on the future of teams, how we expect the teams to evolve, and close with a Q&A at the end as well. For our participants, I am hoping you can all see the Q&A button at the bottom of your page. We will be taking questions during the session, so you can raise your questions, share your thoughts and reflections as they emerge throughout the session. We will try to answer as many of those as possible during the session. And I already see a question around where can we find the report. You will soon have the answer to that. We will show some QR codes about the report as well. And so we will have some time, hopefully at the end of the session, also to cover most of the questions. But given the number of participants we have, we might not be able to cover all of them today. We will hopefully be able to connect later to cover all of them as well. So let's get going with our agenda. Before we actually pass the microphone to Gillian to talk about the research, I also want to quickly get us to start thinking about teams. So we have created a few questions, a polling question for us to get going on this topic. So the question we have is thinking about one of the teams you're part of right now. Please answer your agreement, how much you agree with the statements you see on the screen. Okay, I will move on. We will show the poll results in a few minutes. So this was just to start our thinking on the process. Let's move on and start with Gillian. I'm really in love with this research, Gillian, and thanks for your work on this. And the question I wanted to ask you first is the question you see on the screen, and I love the insights from the research. So could you start telling us a little bit about why teams and why now?
Yeah, yes, thanks Barak, and it's great to be here. Just before I get into that, for anyone who doesn't know who CRF is, we're based in the UK, and we run a research network for senior HR professionals. So we've done research in all sorts of different areas around strategic HR and talent topics, and specifically team effectiveness this year. And yeah, I mean, the question we started with was, you know, why should we worry about team effectiveness? Why is it so important in today's world? And I think there are a number of reasons for that, Barak. What we see is that there's a lot of evidence that suggests that collaboration and team working have significantly increased since the start of the pandemic. So, for example, Microsoft data shows that the number of meetings per person has increased by 150% since March 2020. And I wonder if everyone on the call has had that experience. I know I certainly have in my work as well. So we're all now working in more teams, and we have more meetings to contend with, and there are more people in those meetings than ever before. And that's making life a whole lot more complex. And it was interesting, Barak, actually, in your poll question, you used the word team in the singular. And when I read that, I thought, if I had, you know, how do I answer that for one team? You know, if people are working multiple teams. So, and from all the thumbs up, I think we're seeing this as the reality for people on the call today as well. So, yeah, Claire, if you can share this image, this is really, I love this image, and it's in the report, which, as Barak said, you can access through the QR code. But this image to me clearly demonstrates the impact of increasing numbers and particularly sizes of teams. This shows that for every person you add to a team, you don't just add one person, but you actually add multiple lines of communication. And what that means is that it takes time and effort to manage the increased complexity and the increased requirement around communication when you increase the team size. So we know other research tells us that 2/3 of managers work on 5 or more teams. And so what that tells us that is, you know, as work increasingly is done through projects which involve teams, there's more and more interdependence and complexity, and teams are increasingly the vehicle by which work gets done. But what we're also finding, and we talk about this a lot in the research, is that the nature of teamwork is also changing. So hybrid virtual teams are now the norm, and the boundaries of teams are becoming fuzzier than ever. So I think one of the implications for that is that we have to work much harder to establish trust, and we're going to be talking a lot about trust today, and a sense of belonging, which is another topic that we've already touched on. So to establish trust and to establish a sense of belonging, it's difficult in any team, but it's particularly challenging in virtual teams, where we really have to pay much more attention to communication. So, you know, getting better at teamwork and supporting our organizations to build effective teams is really a challenge for us all. But what we also find is that good teamwork is as elusive as it always has been. Research shows that as many as 75%, so 3/4 of cross-functional teams are dysfunctional. And we also know from extensive research over time is that teams tend to underperform relative to the resources that are available to them. So, you know, teams encounter problems with coordination and motivation, what we call process losses around team working. And that typically chips away at the benefits that we see from greater collaboration. And we also find that certain people, bad behaviours emerge, and we see what we call social loafing, where individuals work less hard on a team than they would on their own. So you're always going to find there's 1 or 2 people who do a bit of freeloading. So the challenge that we face in thinking about team effectiveness is to make sure that the undoubted benefits of working in teams, so for example, greater output, greater creativity, the quality of ideas that you might get in ideal circumstances, that is greater than the additional effort that we need to set up and sustain a high-performing team. So for me, that's really at the core of the challenge around team effectiveness.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. I think this is also showing the critical aspect of talking about teams right now, because the essential benefit of teams is to make 1 + 1 3, right? But what you are saying is the research shows us that actually sometimes it is not functional, and sometimes it actually creates some negative effects as well. So what makes teams effective? If you can share what the key characteristics of effective teams are, that would be also good to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was really interesting in doing this research is we went right back to basics in terms of looking at some of the key theories and frameworks. And I think one of the key messages of our research is that certainly the nature of team working has changed, but the fundamentals of what makes effective teams remain more or less the same. There's some nuances around the edges, but you know, we can still go back to what we have always known about effective team working for inspiration. And I think the first thing that we have to tackle, the first question we have to tackle is, what is a team, and are we actually dealing with a real team, or are we just dealing with working groups? And you know, it really struck me as we were doing this research that a lot of the challenges that organizations face around team effectiveness could actually potentially be solved by being really deliberate and mindful about when we're dealing with a team and when a working group is simply good enough. So it's interesting that the word team has become this sort of irrepressibly positive thing, to almost to the point where the word team has become a little bit fetishized. You know, they're seen as unquestionably positive things, teams. But in reality, it's really hard to get teams to work effectively. So, and even the best teams will incur costs. So, you know, you have to make sure that the additional effort of setting up and maintaining a team is actually worth the effort. So, when we would be looking at a real team, would be, you know, it's all about interdependence and having a collective outcome that can't be achieved simply by individuals doing their bit. To me, that's really at the core of being a team. So I think we have to be wary, in particular, of what you might call pseudo teams, where groups, you know, they think, oh, we need to be a team, and they've created the interactions and the interdependences that go with being a team, but the work itself doesn't actually require it. And that can be hell both for people who are involved in those teams and for the organization as a whole. So I think there are three things that I would particularly highlight that differentiate real teams. The first is that they have a clear shared purpose. So there's a shared collective outcome that requires individuals to work together interdependently to achieve that goal that individuals can't deliver on their own. The second is that there are clear boundaries. So members know who's on the team and then can distinguish reliably between those people who share accountability for a collective outcome and others who might help out in different ways but are not permanent members of the team. And I think this is one area where teamwork is perhaps shifting, and I think the boundaries are becoming more fluid and fuzzy as we get involved in a larger number of teams. And I think the third distinguishing factor is that there is clear authority for the team to manage its own work processes and to make decisions. So if you have those three things in place, you're probably dealing with a real team. And I think what we often find is that, particularly at the executive level, this idea of a real team is quite challenging, because often we find individuals have responsibility for running their own business, but when they come together at the executive level, you know, what are we actually here together to deliver? Are we just a committee for rubber stamping decisions, or are there things that we as a collective need to deliver? So I think often it's helpful for executive teams in particular to go into a dialogue about, you know, what do we do as a team together, as opposed to, you know, a bunch of individuals working in parallel with each other. But I think the key message for me around real teams is that they align around task. So when you're trying to set up a team for success, it's really about, what's really important is clarity around why the team exists and what it's there to achieve. And sometimes I think the behavioural issues that we might be looking to tackle in team effectiveness interventions, sometimes, you know, we might think that it's about, oh, team members are not getting on, there are issues around dynamics. Often it's actually about clarity, and a lot of the work, I think, around team effectiveness really needs to focus on, can we get clarity around what we're there to do, and how we need to work collectively to deliver that. So that's the first point, really, is around having a real team. I think the second key point that we talk about a lot in the research is the importance of trust. And I'm sure that's not going to be surprising to anyone who's on this call today, but we very clearly we know that trust is fundamental to team success. And in the report we talk about Fry and Morris's work, which you can see, there's an article on HBR that sort of talks about this in a lot more depth. But it says that trust has three drivers. The first is authenticity. So I experience the real you when I work with you. The second is logic. So I know that you can do it, that your reasoning, your judgment, your purpose in being here are sound, and that I can rely on you to deliver against that. And the third is empathy. So I believe that you care about me and about my success. So there's a kind of what we're doing, but also how we work together that's fundamental to trust. And we also, very commonly, a lot of the people we talk to in doing this research, Lencioni's pyramid came up as well, the five dysfunctions of a team, and really at the foundation of that as well is trust. And I think the other angle around trust is psychological safety. So I'm sure many of you will be familiar with Google's Project Aristotle research. And what they found, and this is a real kind of data-driven project, what they found was that the most significant differentiating factor around successful teams was psychological safety. And what we mean by that is, in the team context, psychological safety happens when people feel that they can speak up, they can take risks, they can put forward ideas, they can share concerns that they might have about strategy or direction without the fear that they're going to be humiliated, embarrassed, picked on. And that's something that is really, I know we're going to be talking about leadership, team leadership. That's a critical role that team leaders have to play in setting up and maintaining psychological safety over time. And I think one of the things that we really look at in the research that is a real challenge for team effectiveness is to think about, so we know that we have to build trust, but what's the right order, what's the right sequence to tackle the different things that we need to have in place to build effective teams? Do we go straight into sort of bearing our souls and talking about our personal histories and the kind of life challenges that we faced along the way to reveal our vulnerabilities and build trust? Or do we actually start with the what and really be clear about what our goals are as a team and how we're going to work together, and use that as a foundation to build trust sort of incrementally over time? And I think one of the things that really became clear to me as we looked at this research was that it's not just what you do about building team effectiveness that matters. The sequencing is also important, and you need to tackle the steps in the right order. And I really like Professor Ina Togal's work in this space. She's at IMD, and she's done a lot of research around, not just around what makes effective teams, but the stages of building team effectiveness. And Ina's work suggests that you have to start by building agreement around what the team is there to do and how the team will work together. And really importantly, what we'll do when things go wrong. So how we can make sure that we keep on track and we hold each other to account. And that really forms a contract upon which trust can then be developed over time. And that in turn enables performance, feedback, and learning to happen and to follow on from, as the team learns to work together. So building agreement, what does that mean in practice? Well, I think there are some number of questions that you would want to address in looking to build agreement. One is, back to what I've already said a number of times, but what is this team uniquely positioned to do that others can't? So getting clear around that is important. What goals do we need to achieve as a team? And how will we measure that we've actually, achieved those goals and got to where we need to be? What behavioural norms do we need to establish to know that we are working together effectively? And really importantly, how will we call each other out when those norms are not being adhered to? So that's a good example of a place where you can bring in psychological safety and really start from a place where people feel safe to call others out and hold each other to account. What roles will we all play in the team? What are the unique strengths and contributions that each individual team member brings, and what weaknesses might we have to pay attention to or look out for? And really importantly, how will we have fun together? Work does not always have to be a hard grind and challenging. How will we make sure that we have fun along the way? So just to conclude my sort of opening remarks and before I hand over to questions and comments, I think there were a couple of recommendations from our research that I'd like to just sort of put on the table, that sort of followed on from what we found. And the first is really to make sure that wherever you're going to invest in team effectiveness, just make sure that you're focusing on those parts of your business where the potential benefits of high-performing teams will have greatest impact on critical business outcomes. So, for example, if you're developing a new line of business that's going to be really critical to your future success as a business, or if you're looking to integrate an acquisition successfully, those are areas where you're really going to be wanting to devote your team effectiveness efforts and activities. And the second is to prioritise those teams that tend to have the greatest difficulty getting to a level of high performance, or those who experience the highest levels of conflict. And those might be cross-functional teams, they might be multidisciplinary teams or diverse teams, where we know those are most likely to encounter conflict and struggle to get to high performance. For example, where people have to collaborate in ways that might not have been required of them in the past. So just a couple of thoughts around sort of where you might want to focus efforts. So Barak, back to you.
Thanks, Julian. Great insights. Also, lots of great perspectives to think about the whole process of supporting teams. I know people will have more questions on this. I would like to invite all our participants, if you have any questions, please put them on the Q&A. I already see one question about Nicole asking about the author of the process you mentioned, Julian, Professor Ina Toggle. You will be able to see Professor Toggle's research details also in the report if you go to the QR code on the screen. So she's referred to in the report. If there are any other questions, please feel free to put them on the chat. I will move on to the next topic if there are not any other study. Okay, sorry, the study about trust. Who were the authors?
Great. Yes. If I can, what I'll try and do is put a link in the chat to that specific article, if I can do that. So just bear with me. The names, it's Fry, F-R-E-I, and Morris, M-O-R-R-I-S-S. And there is an article in HBR, but I will, while we're talking, I'll go away and find the link to that and post it.
Well, begin with trust. It's also in the appendix of the report, so you'll be able to see all of those references there. Great. So, okay, more questions are coming. What are some practical ways to introduce this? Mary, we'll come to that very soon. QR code will come also at the end of the session. Also, you will receive more details after, so no worries. Okay, they might perceive it as touchy-feely. Okay, Mary's question around how to introduce this to a new team. Sometimes they shy away from this. Mary, if you don't mind, we will answer some of these questions already. If not, we'll come back to that. Okay, so let's move on to the next point I wanted to highlight. First of all, thanks again, Julian. Great insights. And one thing I love about this research is that it's also almost summarizing all the things we need to consider around how we look at teams, whether they're a real team or just a group or working group. Then how also we need to think about what makes teams effective, and also how we look at the process of moving teams to a more effective state. And another thing I love about this is it also very nicely aligns with our LHH research we did on this topic. Recently, we we completed these research projects independently at LHH. We have undertaken this research effort over the last year to really crack the code of what makes teams effective. And our findings showed that there are 3 key elements for effective teams, and they are belonging, purpose, and agility. Purpose, that shared purpose, you already mentioned that as one of the fundamental things that differentiate real teams, Gillian. And then belonging, that trust and psychological safety element that is really heavily highlighted in the report, is also part of our findings in LHH research. And agility is around the team norms, agreeing on that initial agreement, like contracting, as you mentioned, and also how we make decisions, how we move forward. Those are all elements of agility we believe are all important. So what we did ask our participants in the beginning of the session is how they evaluate one of their teams. I know they might be part of several teams, one of their teams in terms of these 3 dimensions with some simple questions. Now we can show the results of what everyone thought their teams are like. Let's see the results. When it comes to belonging element, about 73% of the participants agree or strongly agree that they feel belonging in their teams, which is great news, I would say. And when it comes to purpose, that is also almost 60%, but still about 40% are less positive about their team's purpose. And then in terms of agility, strongly agrees goes down in terms of agility, and also agree goes down. In total, it's around 49% agree or strongly agree. So it shows the need to focus more on agility, I believe, as organizations in this group are slightly less effective in that area. So overall, these 3 are the areas that we believe are important, and different research studies and frameworks in the past from Heckman or Lencioni also highlighted the importance of these key elements. So what I want to do is, without spending much more time on the research part of this, I want to move to the real practical insights. How can we really, also answering Mary's question on this, how can we really make organizations better at creating high-performing teams? So the first question is around the insights we have for organizations. I will ask Claire. Claire, in your experience, what are the things organizations can do to create a high-performing team culture?
Yeah, I will. Thank you. But firstly, what I would like to do is elaborate on why now, because I think this is a really important piece. So we can see that a team climate is more important now than ever before. And I think that really points to our own sort of feelings about needing to feel more connected to work and having that clarity of direction, and how our fast-paced and uncertain context are asking more of us. They're asking us to be agile in a way that we haven't really, ever been before. And just to throw in some research on why teams now, as well, from a slightly different perspective, is that Harvard reported that 40% of us are more isolated now than ever before at work. And in 2022, Gallup polled that 60% of us are emotionally detached from work. And then additionally, the Centre of Disease Control reported that 71% of adults had at least one symptom of workplace stress. So, but the good news is, I think that's such an opportunity for us, and it's a real call to action to make the team space a place of really sharing, sense making, and being able to share these types of emotions, and as I say, give and get direction and show strengths from to one another as team members. And we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So where to start in building a high performing team culture? I think complexity is certainly here to stay. And deciding on an approach and iterating that and modifying as the effort progresses seems to be essential in making sure you land with something that's sustainable. And there are some clear lines of adoption organisations can consider, and I'll just outline 3 approaches. The first one Gillian sort of alluded to there is starting with building a network of teams with those who are deemed adding the most strategic value and need to influence the organisation with pace. These could be from anywhere in the business, from shop floor to customer services to the board level. Building this strong network can really amplify their impact and can act as a way of prototyping methods and ideas of team activities, which other teams can then later use and apply. Starting with this approach can also really give that nice strong role modelling and expectations that teams are critical. Another one is around the traditional good old top-down approach, where senior teams are identified as the critical population to start with, where they provide the mandate and the expectation that teamwork and team attention is a strategic imperative. This is often a very successful approach, although possibly now it is too slow. One example I'd like to share with you is an organisation, 50,000 global company, who really made an amazing commitment to developing an organisation team capability, but it took 5 years in the design. And that unfortunately caused a lot of frustration from team leaders in that 5 years. And ultimately, they then decided to reach out to different suppliers, have different team effectiveness type models, and use it with their teams. And when the organisation was ready to move with their approach, there was an underlying confusion of what the organisation stood for in terms of team. So a third approach, which is probably the one I lean to, is to empower teams from the get-go, to provide the architecture and resources for teams and their team members to access as they need it. This approach provides a framework, yet ensures it's unique to the team. It empowers the team to drive accountability for their team experience whilst working on the strategic focus of the organisation. So it's like providing a framework, providing the resources, providing the methodology which the teams and team members draw from. The other benefit to this, it builds the familiarity across the teams, ensuring so when team members hop from one another, which is inevitable, that's going to speed up, teams are not thinking what is happening, they're more familiar with it. And also they're not waiting for the optimum time to start. You can start now at any point where you're at. And finally, just really briefly, I would like to just touch on this point around team versus group, which is really, really critical. It is true that not all working teams, or if we think we're a team, are our working group in the academic sense of the word. However, back to that kind of that drive and why now of teams, all groups of people and individuals will benefit from team-like solutions, especially when we consider, as I say, that changing relationship we have with work. So providing a portfolio of solutions which help both groups and teams will bring the greatest return on organisation, just ensuring that match is correct. So that's my summary in terms of organisations. I don't know, Gillian or Barak, do you have anything to add on to that?
Gillian, would you like to comment as well on that?
I was just sorry, I was having a look at the questions in the chat, and I wonder if we'd like to do, there's some really interesting comments here, and I wonder if we would pick those up.
Sure. Shall I pick one there then? There is a lot over there, so I just didn't know where to start. I also see some hands up. If you raise your hands, would you mind putting your comment or question in the chat while we are going through that, because we prioritize the ones on the chat. I saw a comment from Scott sharing actually that distinction between real team and group is really helpful, and that really actually differentiates how we work with them. That was a comment. But when it comes to what Claire just said around really organizationally achieving this high-performing team culture, I think Andrew's comment or question here is quite interesting, which is around trust and vulnerability, especially when senior teams are coming together. Senior leaders tend to not accept their mistakes, or they don't want to, they struggle talking about the parts that are hard for them, that are vulnerable. How do we really enable this type of behavior or culture with senior leaders? Any thoughts, any recommendations on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to leadership and just, you know, reflecting on this idea of high performance team culture. I think there's, you know, you sort of ask, well, how do cultures develop? And for me, a culture is basically, it's really it's consistent behavior over time. So the more you see repeated consistent behavior, that then becomes a feature of your culture. And you know, so there are different ways that you can influence that. The most important being around leadership. And I think, you know, for me, the question is, who do we promote as a leader? You know, who are our heroes, our role models? Who are those people who get rewarded, who get the bigger gigs? And that's not something you can necessarily fix from one day to the next. But you know, to Andrew's point, not necessarily something you can fix overnight, but over time, thinking really carefully about what are our criteria for promotion, who do we value in the organisation, both financially and in other ways, you know, by being given the plum assignments and being, you know, being perceived as being influential in the organisation. So that's something that to me needs to be carefully thought through. Mm-hmm. I think the second thing for me is around having standards, guardrails around the culture. So again, how you influence a culture is by the things that you measure, the things that get rewarded. You know, attending to that. And I think that the other point, and it sort of links to something Claire was saying earlier around having an embedded process. So do you have a well understood process for thinking about team development and team effectiveness? And that's why I really like the LHH model. You know, it's rooted in research, but there's a lot of complexity to it, but it's shown in a fairly straightforward way. So there's critical things to focus on. Having a shared understanding of, you know, what makes a good team and what are the actions that we take consistently over time to develop teams in our organization. And there's some really good examples from our research of companies who've gone through that process, who've come up with their own model and is widely shared and communicated and understood by people across the organization. So just some thoughts on that.
Thank you. And I think that I'm hearing team leader, I'm really hearing the team process, and I'm also hearing this agreement point that you made earlier again. So I would love to move to that question next around team leader, which is a nice segue to our next point. What is the role of the team leader? Steph, may I invite you to share your thoughts on this one?
Yes, happy to jump in. Hi, everyone. So you've heard many of this, some of the things I'm going to mention from Jillian and the research, but I mean, clearly it's not so much about style of the leader as much as it is about, you know, that they're focusing on what they need to do to foster that team effectiveness. So they're really responsible for structuring the team properly, making sure you've got a real team and you've got the right players on the team, that you have the right skill sets, capabilities, and that compelling direction. I don't think we can underscore how important that is for a team leader to ensure that they have an alignment around that team direction. And then, of course, holding the team accountable to some of those norms and behaviors that they agree upon. And the team leader, too, needs to be ensuring that they're getting the resources and support that the team needs to do the teamwork. So I think there's, you know, lots of things that a team leader can do, but I'll choose a few of these just to dive in a little bit more. So a discernment, I would say, would be one critical aspect, in that they need to be able to recognize how well the team is working. Are there gaps, right, in the team dynamics and team performance, and then what and how it needs to be addressed. So if they're unaware of some of these, you know, issues or challenges around alignment or team dynamics, they're not going to fully buy in, right? To the team needs some support and to work on these critical areas. So I would say discernment's a key one. Again, the compelling purpose. Jillian, you know, talked about this at length. I can't underscore that enough. Does that team leader have a clear sense of that overarching purpose of what is it that this only this team can do, right? And those interdependencies that are so critical to achieving that purpose, right? Why do they exist? And so I would say that, that's an important part. So the team leader needs to have their own perspective of that, but they don't need to do it in a vacuum, right? So we've seen many teams effectively work together to create that compelling purpose. If you're going to be able to do that, of course, then team members are going to embrace it. They're going to stand behind the purpose. They're going to hold themselves accountable because it's theirs versus it being pushed onto them from the team leader. So I'd always recommend that the team leader has their own sense of what that looks like, but involve the team on really narrowing down what that means for everyone. Because if they don't have that, they're going to focus on their own individual goals and priorities and without regards to the team's work. So I'll share an example of a team that I worked with a few years ago. They were fun to work with, to be honest. This was a senior team in a North America headquarters, global organization. They were rock stars, honestly. High performing team to anyone's standards. They'd worked together a long time, high sense of and strong sense of belonging, a trust with each other. But what was happening is they were becoming complacent. They were number one in their market year after year. They were beating their goals year after year. So it was like this high performing team was gelling so much and so productive and effective that they were, success was expected. I'll say it that way. So the president of North America realized this as he started seeing this complacency and that this ongoing success was being taken for granted. So he, reached out and said, I need some help, especially because this was really concerning. Their number 2 and number 3 competitors in the market were merging. So if you can imagine, the fear was, we don't want to lose our market share and our space as number 1 in the market. So we worked with that team to really help them understand there's this burning platform that needs to drive you to create a new compelling purpose, right? To ward off what could be coming with this new competitive merge. And it was a very successful experience with them, and they're still doing very well. But the CEO recognized I need to light a fire under people a little bit. But so that's a quick story. But so that shared purpose is a critical component. And then I think Barack, I think I'm turning this one back over to you.
Sure, thanks, Stephanie. I love that example. Also, I think it brings the realization that even successful teams might need to re-energize themselves around purpose, their belonging, their agility. So that's a great example. And as you also touched upon the different elements of how you actually how team leaders help their teams, I want to also ask Claire's opinion on how we help teams with this process. Claire, you work with lots of team leaders to change their habits, make them more effective. What is the process you take them through?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump to that in just a second. And just to build on there with Steph's point about team leaders, I think there's a real call to action here for team leaders to refresh and modernize their thinking about what team effectiveness really is, and really get behind the multiple amount of research saying that if you belong to a team, you're 3 times more likely to engage. So doing this work, however that shows, it's it's a real benefit. I just want to say that I was thinking about the traditional saying of there is no I in team, and I would say that actually no longer serves us, and being individual in a team for the collective is actually where we're going. Okay, so let's have a look at the process. So I don't know about you, I do remember many years ago going to team effectiveness events and feeling like I was going to be shoehorned into something that I really didn't know what it was or where I was going. And those days really are, they're in the past now because of our context in terms of needing to be aligned with what's needed in the organisation and for the individuals. So let's start, in diagnosing and aligning stages. Leaders are really looking for an approach which starts where the team is at, which is what we've already said, that flexible enough to adapt to the needs and ensures that the strategic leaders' goals are achieved. We always recommend a method of collecting team member and team leader voices. Otherwise, if I don't have a say, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't understand the importance of this work. So it's so important that the team and the team leader drive the agenda of their effectiveness journey, and the diagnostic at the front end really enables that to happen. We can do this through surveys, which is a really nice, easy way to get a temperature check. And also we can go in depth and have one-to-one exploratory conversations and have thematic analysis about the granular details around culture, team leader, and also what needs to be in place for, in the eyes of the team, of what they need to be performing. And then that's about, before them moving ahead, it's on the align stage, it's ensuring that the team leader is set up for success and they understand what's being said by the team in advance, and then also that the team is aligned in terms of getting a collective agreement about what is being said. And that can be, it's a very important stage. Embed and reinforce, then here it's important to stress actually that the team program itself is always the stimulus for change. You know, the program itself, the journey, is kind of not the hero, as I like to say. It's the change by the team members in the flow of work which matters, and that's really the superhero. So really encouraging different behaviors, different team habits in the flow of work, and thinking about that through, often with a team coach, is very invaluable. Making changes and shifts to what's working, measuring the impact result, also from stakeholders, back to the point that a team is not a vacuum. Is what we're doing working? How do we do? Do we need to embed? Do we reinforce? And we reassess the work that we're doing as a team.
Thanks,
thank you.
Thank you. I like this a lot, and also the fact that this process is an iterative one. I remember one point from Professor Toggle, and also in the report, CRF report, that when working with the teams, it is good to do little and often. It's okay to do just a small intervention, just a small reminder, just a small recontracting, remembering of the purpose, or any of these elements, but then do it often so that it keeps going, it keeps staying fresh in people's mind, and the team keeps evolving as a team. Great. So I know we are almost going out of time now, so I will move on a bit faster. The last question I wanted to have around this is around the insights we have for organizations, is the role of the team members. I'm going to open it up to the panel. Whoever would like to respond to this. The question is, what are the responsibilities of being a team member? It's not only in the hands of the leaders, right? So who would like to go for this one?
I'm happy to jump in, Brock.
Thanks,
So,
yes.
Yes. So the team members are critical, right? We don't want to overlook the importance of team members in ensuring performance and, of course, healthy dynamics. So it's not all on the shoulders of the team leader. So to be clear on that. So I would really say a few things about the responsibilities of a team member, is that they're able to have a broader lens, look more from an enterprise or a wider perspective of what the team goals are. And so they can't just be focused on their own individual goals of their function or their department, and being able to juggle those two different priorities and those concepts is really going to be critical for the success of both the team, but also the success of the group that they lead. So I'd say that'd be one. Another one is about that vulnerability. So it's just key to build trust. So if you're willing to be courageous and open about your own weaknesses, challenges, where you fall short, where you've made mistakes, it's really going to start to create that mutual trust, I think, that you need within the team. And being courageous enough to do that yourself, hopefully other people will join in, and you can really create that psychological safety that we mentioned earlier.
And I'm going to jump in there just really quickly as well. I think there's something there about team member expectations and what it takes to be part of a high performing team. Being in part of a high performing team will have higher levels of tension, and it will because boundaries are pushed, standards are raised, and people are really being held to account. I really like, there's a term around being type 1 type of fun in a team, which is that feeling, I feel good, I can be myself, I'm vulnerable, so everything's good. But type 2 is that real push, and where the results of the fun or the benefits of that come much later, because there's been challenge and it's kind of like a much more rigorous process. And that's really where the magic starts to happen. But the expectations, no, that's how it's going to be as a team member. It's going to be tough in areas.
Great, thank you, Claire.
Can I jump in as well with a comment? And I'd like to link it to Nicole's question in the Q&A, which is around what about organisations moving to self-empowered teams in an agile environment? And I do think that's one of the big trends that we're seeing. And I think the word I would use here is discipline. Because I think it's easy to assume that, oh, you know, we're agile, we're all kind of flexible, and you know, we move around a lot. But actually, when you look at what agile means, it is actually very disciplined. There are well understood processes that everyone follows, and that sort of enables a space to be created where things can happen quickly. And I think it's similar with team effectiveness. You know, that there are having kind of agreed standards and a rigor that's applied across the board around team effectiveness in some ways makes it easier to then do the work, because everyone knows what's expected, and we're on a path that's well trodden. Everyone understands what that shared process for team effectiveness is. And that also means that it's something that can potentially be technology enabled. So we're starting to see kind of emergence of things like apps that work alongside teams to nudge them to, you know, do those regular check-ins, or, you know, or do that work in terms of putting the agreement together at the outset. So, you know, I think there's just so much that's interesting going on in this space.
Wonderful, thank you, Gillian. And actually, you answered almost my next question too, which is great. So, as we are almost running out of time, I want to also really answer some of the other questions on the chat. But what you said, Gillian, I think is a really good answer to this question too. What is the future of teams? And self-managed teams are becoming the future of organizations already. Organizations are moving there. And the technology that supports teams is going to be critical. I had a few other predictions about these I want to share very quickly with everyone as well. The first one, I believe, for the future of teams is going to be about human connection. We all know the importance of it already. It is quite an important element in teams, that belonging element. But I predict that there will be even a higher need to focus on this in teams as we go forward, as the teams are more remote, and as our team members start becoming robots, for example, right? We will have to use more of our human skills, and human connection skills will be critical. Second, I think the teaming process, coming to that high self-managed team example, like there are more squads, tribes coming together, resolving very quickly after they accomplish what they need to accomplish. So this is becoming the norm. And I think what teams will need to get better at is how to team together in a short period of time, make something effective, and dissolve as a team. And that requires different skills, I guess. And then the third, but not the last, but the third for now of my predictions for the future is that team leaders, their role is moving towards a team coach rather than a team leader. And we see that a lot more in agile teams and the squads and tribes working in more self-managed organizations now. And I think that need will very strongly increase in the near future. These were the future predictions. I am glad we were able to finish the key agenda points on time, and I want to quickly have a look at some of the questions and discuss them as well. By the way, for those of you who are interested in the CRF report, you can see the QR code again on the screen, and also the Team Effectiveness Report from LHH also is on the screen. If you have any questions, thoughts, you can send your questions to the email address you see there, or you can reach out to any of us. And also you can follow LHH on LinkedIn to hear about the future events we will run on different elements of team effectiveness, including belonging, purpose, and agility in the coming months. I'm going to quickly ask a few of the questions to the panel here. One question that was raised, I think, is around how to structure the team. I think Sabrina raised this question. If it's Sabrina, I think mentioned that her team is about 40 people or so, and it's becoming harder to really manage that size. What would be our tips for the right structure? Who would like to take that?
I would like to say don't have 40 in a team. That's a lot of people to be. I mean, again, on the research side, it's keeping those numbers down, and I think it's around 9 to 12 as the optimum, and that's back from Kazembach's work a long time ago, and still present now to have that impact. So there is potentially having mini teams within your wider team, so that they can have their voice, and have that individualism that's needed within the team space.
Mm-hmm. Great. And another question from Rama about when a new external leader comes in, how do we prevent that potential passive-aggressive behavior towards the new leader if the direct reports are people who are overlooked, for example, for promotion?
Gosh.
Difficult question.
Start with the diagnostic, get the voices in, start airing that really early on before you go down any type of program, and have some really good conversation and robust conversation about that, making that really transparent and working with the leader to navigate that.
Yeah. Quickly to clarify, thanks, Claire, for that. Quickly to clarify something Ian wrote around, not sure I agree about there being higher levels of tensions in a high-performing team. I don't know
that was myself who said that. I kind of like it, because I think there should be. So being in a high-performing team, tensions are positive. Tension is getting to cutting-edge thinking. If you don't have that rigor and the tension, then how will you spark new ideas and new thinking? It's how the tension is managed. If you have the foundation of the trust there, then you'll bounce back. It's having the tension while maintaining the relationship that's so important. So belonging is good, but you've got to stretch it out so that you go further and wider in thinking, and ultimately, products, solutions, and services.
Great. Thank you, Claire. We are running out of time. Unfortunately, we won't be able to answer all the questions, but please feel free to reach out for more. Linda is asking for which research shows the number 9 to 2 would be good too. I think, Linda, you can also find some answers in the CRF report on that. I think it says 8, if I'm not wrong, 8 to 9, the same similar numbers. And Scott asked how to team quickly. That prediction I made around teams will need to get better at teaming. I think the answer to that question by itself can be a few sessions, so I won't be able to answer that now, but let's discuss it in the future. A really good question. And I think we all have to become better at coaching teams and moving forward with teams as faster as possible. Thank you all for participating today. The recording will be shared, and feel free to share your feedback after the session, and feel free to reach out to our participants, our panelists. And thank you to our panelists for your wonderful time we spent here for the conversation. We're looking forward to talking more about team effectiveness in the near future.